All right, welcome to Chapter 3. This is selecting and defining a research program. Really, this is the first step in the process. And so I'm going to walk you through kind of what that normally entails. So some objectives, things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how to select a research question. We're going to talk about the different examples of quantitative and qualitative research problems. We're going to describe the different types of hypotheses, and then I'm going to help you with some examples of a research hypothesis. So when you think about the scientific method, and this is probably something you talked about back in elementary school when maybe you did a science project, in the 5 different stages, the first stage is always recognition and definition of a problem, and that's kind of where we're at right now. You can see those other stages. Keep in mind though that I put a little like double asterisk here, I guess, for double emphasis. There's no perfect method, no perfect measuring instrument, and no perfect data collection process. You're always going to be learning as you go. And even when you think through all the different things that can happen, there's still ways that after the fact, you would say, if I did this again, I would probably do this a little differently. So how do we find our problem, and especially in educational settings? Usually it's a question of what you're interested in, and it's got to be something that can be tested or something that we can answer by collecting data and analyzing data. Now, your Truman MAE, getting your master's degree, it requires an action research project, and you do that during your internship. And what we're doing is we're going to ask you to identify a problem and then possibly create an intervention or collect some data related to that problem, and then make some recommendations for how to solve that problem. And it's meant to be sort of a fixing or problem solving process. So research that provides a solution to everyday problems in educational context, that's action research. So your personal experiences, it could be something that you read about in the literature, could be something that you saw on social media, some discussion that you had in class. That's usually where these problems start from. So some characteristics of a good problem. The problem's interesting to you. You're going to spend a lot of time talking about and researching whatever it is that you choose. You might as well make it something that's interesting to you and has some lasting value. It's got to be something that you can research. So a lot of times we're looking for something that hasn't been solved, but if you make it so difficult or so like nuanced or like a niche kind of topic, sometimes it's hard to find previous research to be able to start from. Has to have a theoretical or practical importance, has to be ethical. So you just watched in the last chapter, chapter 2, all the different ethical guidelines. And then the problem is manageable for the researcher. So in this case, most likely your limiting factor is going to be time. You have a limited amount of time in your student teaching placement to be able to conduct this research, analyze the data, and then report back. And it all has to happen in one semester. So how do we state research problems? I gave you a couple different quantitative examples and then a couple different qualitative examples, but some of these may resonate with you. The biggest issue with research problems is if you think about like how we set goals, SMART goals are really important. We want it to be specific, measurable, attainable, like those kinds of things. And that really holds true for research problems as well. So if you were to say, to a friend, here's my research question that I've been developing, and your friend's like, I don't know how you would ever know. Like if you could answer your question, whatever the question is, then it's probably too vague and it needs to be refined a little bit. So you can see these are very specific, and that's good. You don't want to have like multi-facets in the research question. If that's the case, then you should probably have more than one research question. And for these projects, I would say, at least for my students, I don't allow them to have more than 2, maybe 3 at the most, in terms of research questions that we're going to study in the action research project. So hypotheses are just ways of putting on paper what you think is going to happen. So there's two different, well, there's actually more than two, a couple different types of hypotheses, but two on this slide. So the first one's an inductive hypothesis. And so it's based on specific generalizations. And when we look at things, we're essentially taking the big and making it small. So what we know to be true, and then we're going to narrow it down to something smaller. Deductive hypothesis is something that's derived from a theory and provides evidence that expands. So we start small and then it goes out. Kind of opposite in how they work, but I think you kind of get the idea. All right, a non-directional hypothesis is something that's just very general, meaning that there's no relation or difference that exists among the variables. So, for example, there are differences between male and female students in spatial ability. It doesn't say like positive differences, negative differences. It just says there's differences. A directional hypothesis states that there is like a way that we think things are going to happen. So in this case, male students will outperform female students on a test of spatial ability. You can see the difference between the non-directional and directional hypothesis. Okay, in your stats, previous stats class, you probably talked about a null hypothesis, and it states that there's no significant relationship or difference among the variables. And so what happens is we either accept the null or reject the null, to use some stats language, and that probably is bringing back nightmares for some of you. But that's the null hypothesis, that there's no relationship among the variables. So a practice example, we're going to identify P is a participant, X is one of the variables, and Y is one of the variables. You should be able to, by reading this question here, purpose of this study is to examine benefits in 9th grade students' achievement based on attendance at a Saturday tutoring program. We want to know who the participants are. In this case, it's 9th grade students. Our first variable is the Saturday program attendance, or if they don't come, the non-attendance. And then Y, the dependent variable, is achievement. So the X variable a lot of times is the more consistent kind of thing. We can measure very easily, like if they came or didn't come. And then the achievement varies probably based on their attendance or non-attendance. Here's another example. The purpose of the study is to examine differences in social skills between those middle school children who are involved in extracurricular activities and those who are not involved in extracurricular activities. So again, our participants are middle school children, the extracurricular activities, and then the social skills is what we're looking at. That's the dependent variable. We're going to see what relationship exists between those two. If you can't identify the P, the X, and the Y in your research question, you need to refine your research question. Okay, so we're going to move to testing the hypothesis. It's used to guide. I just gave you several examples of what this looks like, but in terms of how we conduct the study, we want to determine if we can support the hypothesis. If it's a non-directional hypothesis, just that there was a difference, we want to see that there was a difference. And then we might put a tag on it and say there was a positive difference or there was a negative difference. Hypotheses are not proven. It's not like it's 100% true all of the time. It's just that in this research study, we can support our hypothesis because of the data that we collected. That does not mean that it's generalizable to all contexts in all cases. Theories are generally true most of the time. That's why they're theories. And we're looking toward our research to support a theory or not, right? Just one side note, when you're doing qualitative research, generally there's not a hypothesis. And the reason for that is because we don't want to risk being objective when we're collecting data. You're trying to just look at whatever you see and write down whatever you see or whatever you observe. Or whatever you hear, and then be open-minded about the possibilities. So typically there's not a formal hypothesis. Now, when I do that kind of research in my head, I'm thinking this is probably what I'm going to see, but my job is to take that bias away and just report what I actually see. So in summary, the research problem should be interesting and relevant. I'm telling you, make it something that's of interest to you or something that's going to help you later on when you get out into your formal teaching environments. It will be so much better. And then we want to make sure that we begin our project with an articulate research question. If you have one that's articulate, that has the P, the X, and the Y, it's going to make it so much easier for you when you go to your analysis and being able to form up what your results are.